Many people like to present Google and many other top companies as being this perfect, idyllic place to work, perfect facilities in the office, excellent, smart team members, great people to work with, and in reality, it's not always the case. Now, in some of my previous videos, you've seen me expose maybe Goldman Sachs and some of the leaked documents that came out publicly about their long work hours, unhappy employees. And in this video, we're going to look at an interesting perspective of someone who worked at Google for several years and what is the reality of working at Google versus the fantasy that you're sold through the media.
You have background, you have horsepower. Over time, over my 9 years of being there, people were less and less smart. So at the beginning, when I entered, there were people there were a number of people that I was like, wow, great person to work with, super smart, definitely somebody that I can connect with. By the time I left, what had happened was more and more people, it became a much, much, much bigger company. And more people that were hired were not those hyper intelligent people that were hired, way early on in Google, 2000, 2001, 2005, and so on. Those people, they had very high hiring standards, and those are the people that came in, and they were paying very well, and it was a hot commodity. So those people came to really experience that. But over time, it became, Google is a large corporation. It is a very big corporation. And they made a couple of decisions that sort of diminish the workforce that's there, and one is becoming big. You can't hire your top 1% when you have 400,000 employees. You just can't. So you have to lower the standards.
So that's important to firstly consider, right, when it comes to lowering standards. When you transition any major company, any major successful company, and you want to expand it, even if it's your own side business and you have a side hustle, it does become very difficult. Whether it's a startup, tech companies, we've seen many tech companies, they can become bloated. They have so many people that they're hiring, and the quality of the average employee does tend to decline, right? And you have this dumbing down of employees just to keep those employees who might not be the smartest, just to keep certain processes going. You have a lower quality of employee if things grow. And this is what you've seen with Google and many other tech companies, that after a few years, a few decades, they definitely lose their shine, lose their kind of buzz around them. Now, this is similar to many banks I've worked at, right? If you're new to the channel, I've worked at places like Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, and so on. And without referring to any specific bank, just in general, banks tend to hire a lot of people. They have these really inefficient processes. So many teams need to give approval for one thing. To get one thing done, it goes through 5 different teams to approve it through a system. And then you see things getting more dumber and less efficient effectively, right? And also there's lower standards when you have all this woke ideology, which we'll come on to, which not knocking anyone in specifically, but there are DEI hires, people hired on the basis of their race or their gender for gender equality purposes. You have to have more women in senior management for the sake of it, rather than hiring them on the basis of their ability to have all these agendas for equality for the sake of it. You have more nepotism and more favoritism, more people just getting their friends to join, more senior employees looking to get their niece or their nephew a job at the company. More and more that type of behavior becomes more ingrained in the corporation, and then it becomes more difficult to manage. And this has impacted Google. They're not isolated, or they're not an exception to the rule here. Now, the truth is, when companies become big, they can't track the local decision making. They don't have any visibility over team dynamics. And I remember having some honest conversations around Christmas time once with some management in our local smaller offices. So we have offices in London, where I've primarily worked, but some of the investment banks I worked at, we have offices in Paris and places like that. And when you start talking to them, you start understanding, right? Some of these smaller offices, they get away with not doing much work, but just looking busy, right? Because they have smaller business operations there, right? So they might be doing a couple hours, literally 2 to 3 hours work a day, make it look like it takes 8 hours, but there's no one in super senior management who's kind of monitoring them. The really senior management might visit them once or twice a year, and they look super busy, like they're doing a lot, but they can really kind of go under the radar there, right? And this happens with the bigger a company gets, regardless of how successful it is. It's so much easier for people to fly under the radar and kind of do less and get away with it. So this has impacted Google, and he's going to tell us more about his experience there.
The diversity, equity, inclusion at Google is extreme. And rightly or wrongly, I'm not here to debate DEI, I don't care, but it was a policy, and still is at Google, to hire diversity. To do that, you have to lower your standards in particular places. It could be for a very good reason. There's nothing wrong with that. But basically, over time, what I noticed was that the level of employee coming in went from being these hyper intelligent, really switched on people to more and more sort of corporate people, right? They're not overly smart. They're not unintelligent, but they're not these guys. They're not the people that were like, wow. So that was a big influence. That was a big consideration for me, because I like working with very, very smart people. And I remember in 2018 or so, when I was riding my motorcycle into campus in Mountain View, I realized that all of the hyper smart people that I had really respected when coming into Google, they were all gone. Sergey, Larry were gone. Eric Schmidt was gone. A bunch of other just awesome people. They were all gone on to different things. And because Google was not the same as it was before. And that's when I started realizing that it was time for me to go as well. People that I was dealing with, they were political. They were much more political than in the past. It's still not.
So, as you can see, DEI does have a negative impact. I know it's a bit of a controversial topic, and I understand both perspectives there. But what ends up happening, you do have lower standards, because you just like, okay, we need to hit a percentage quota of a particular race or gender in certain roles. So you end up forcing that rather than looking for unique people who are good for the job. And typically when you have these changing of the guard at some of these startup companies, and I encourage you all, if you have the opportunity, at least once in your career, get that experience of working at a startup. You could get more responsibility and quickly rise up the ranks there. You could also have the opportunity to really see how a company can grow and maybe get an equity stake in terms of that company. Maybe you can own a percentage of that company. But what ends up happening is, the truth about business is it involves a lot of creativity. But when these companies grow, they go from creative to corporate. And, you lose the edge. In order to have a company that is growing and flourishing, you need to have this kind of free energy. And what do I mean by free energy? That's when things like flexible working come in. And when I say flexible working, I don't just mean people who are maybe parents and want to, start the workday late so can they drop their kids off at school. I'm that type of tech environment you see in the tech industry, where people can maybe wear the clothes they want to wear, chit chat about different ideas, go for coffee breaks. Not in the sense that they're lazy, but in the sense they have kind of freedom and creativity to come up with new ideas and look at the business from different perspectives. But when things become corporate and it becomes, okay, you've got to work a standard 9 to 5, you've got to do these standard set tasks, it basically creates robots and slaves and encourages that behavior rather than like real innovative thinking, because everyone's focused on keeping their job and keeping their particular way of doing things, even if it's inefficient for the company overall. That's why, say, in many cases, it's best to be a lean operation, so you have that freedom, and then you can take a step back or a step forward depending on what's working and what's not working. So this has been my experience when I try to take that innovative, entrepreneurial, dynamic approach, however you want to describe it, at some major investment banks. They don't like it. They have some set rigid processes and you have to get on with it. When I was interested in crypto in 2013, over a decade ago, start talking about it with others, they just think it's a scam. Lots of people in middle management, senior management, you would think at a major investment bank would have an interest in it. They're like, oh, it's a scam. And the thing is, normies and NPCs and people who support whatever dumb agendas in mainstream society, not just a woke agenda, any agenda, they're going to consider you like a fringe person because you have innovative ideas or you don't know what you're talking about, even though you're the rare few who can think for themselves. But you've got to play the corporate game, which is typically a very rigid kind of prison mind game system, right? That's why then lots of these companies, they're like dinosaurs. They're not gonna, a lot of these banks are really gonna struggle as financial innovation continues to pick up because they're not adapting to it. They're just stuck in their rigid ways. They're like dinosaurs that are going extinct. And this is what happens, right? That's why it's so important to have a side hustle so you can focus on those innovative ideas that could change and revolutionize your industry, or work with a smart startup where you get that flexibility, where you get the ability to, work for a smaller finance or tech company, and then you can work the way you want to work, manage your team the way you want to manage it in a very efficient way, and not get caught up in these kind of corporate rigid processes that waste your time and energy. And is another key point here is when management does change, you may want to think about whether you want to change, and you want to change because the culture could change dramatically. You could go from a manager who's kind of laid back and chill to a serious manager, or someone who's making mistakes. They're kind of incompetent for their role. They've been promoted above their level of competence. You could have a situation where you can kind of work on your own type of time frame, and then all of a sudden they want you to complete timesheets about what work you've done at every single hour, how long everything takes. So just bear in mind, senior management changes, you might think, oh, that's 10 levels above me in the corporate chain, it's not going to impact me. And then before you know it, maybe they're changing other managements, they're changing other processes. So look out for that when that change does happen. It can make life really difficult for you, and you may need to leave. So bear that in mind. And like I say, when those management do changes, the management could hire their friends to be the new manager of your team, and they might not like you and things like that. So it's very important to pay attention to those type of social dynamics that could change, even if you think it doesn't impact you directly. Likely a lot of it will.
And to be fair, all of those people coming in are incentivized to continue the mystique that Google hires the smartest, most amazing people, because that reflects on them. They say, oh, I'm a Googler. This is, we only hire the best. It wasn't true. It's not true today. You just can't with that kind of level of hiring that Google was doing. The people that were coming in that were a bit less than before, they continued the mystique. They continued this narrative that, wow, Google only hires the best and the top. And of course, we're one of them, right? We are in that group.
So a quick point there, right? So these companies, they're relying on the mystique of the past, whether it's, I don't want to name or attack any specific companies, but, major universities like London School of Economics or Harvard or Yale, major investment banks like Goldman Sachs, countries like UK, US, they're relying on their previous reputation when they could maintain that mystique, right? And that mystique was justified. Google, for example, here, right? But now people are seeing through those lies, and they really can't. They're relying on a historical perception of themselves that doesn't apply anymore. And that's when you've got to pay attention to shifts in your company's tone, right? If the company changes from a real, let's say, a more open and flexible workplace environment to an environment where everything becomes corporate drivel, corporate wording, they're stifling innovation, they have no interest in crypto, for example, as I mentioned in that example, my previous experience at some investment banks, it really shows these companies are out of touch with what's going on, right? And you see this all the time in like the sales and trading floor that I've worked on, and there's lots of people who are posing and giving the impression of being the smart guy, but they don't know what they're talking about. They might have a tailored suit and present themselves well, but there's a lack of substance there, and you see this time and time again in corporate. And that's when you can have people who play the entire corporate persona, the productivity theater in the office. They're dressed right, they say the right things, but they are not that good at the job, and they make lots of mistakes, and they could be kind of dumb, but this gets overlooked because they are playing the persona you need to play in the office. And that's what it looks like has happened to Google over time.
Since like 2005 at Google, what is Google known for? They're all bought. All of them are bought from other companies and integrated into the Google sphere. So YouTube is an example. It was bought. Android was bought. Google Maps was bought. The Google Docs and the whole workspace and stuff, that was bought, right? So DoubleClick was bought for ads, all kinds of exchanges, all kinds of things. Basically, anything that's been launched besides AdWords, search, and Gmail, which is was a 20% product. Everything else was bought. As a technical guy, as a product manager, being able to launch things that are innovative and change, the billion or 6 billion users that Google has, that's the draw, right? That's to be able to launch products that really touch a lot of people and really matter. You don't have that opportunity at Google. Even no matter how high you get, the risk for Google of launching a bad product is too high. You can't do it. You can't come up with some innovative idea and be like, I think we should do this. They have very, very, very patience and ability to products that might fail. So a couple examples of this. Google Glass is a very good example where Google Glass is a good product. I mean, that is just to remind you, it's sort of with a display and a camera right here, and it will show you things that are on your phone and with the camera. And the idea is that you could build this platform out where it gives you information about what you're seeing and so on. That's cool. That is something.
So a key phrase he used here was reputational risk. Now, some companies, they call it franchise risk. And it's essentially that sometimes innovation might be good, new ideas, new approaches to things could be good, but these major corporations, they become so stifled about protecting their reputation. And I understand they don't want a big scandal, so they don't want to make any type of big bad business moves. They don't want to send out a message there that could really impact their reputation, but it really holds them back, right? And this is really a red flag for layoffs, when a lot of companies, they just focus on doing things the same way, and then they become bloated, and then they have to fire people because they have to keep things efficient without really innovating. They're just acquiring new corporations, new smaller tech companies in the case of Google, to kind of incorporate them into Google's offering without really innovating there. And that's when you have duplication of roles and many people who, like I say, get laid off because things turn more corporate than creative. Now, when I think whether this is the downfall of Google, I think this is really a reflection of just big Western companies. That Google, in my opinion, is like an extension of the US deep state and, surveillance of all people's searches and how they use their computer and things like that. I'm sure there's a lot of back-end collaboration between Google and three-letter agencies there in America. So Google, Disney pushes a woke agenda, many scandals about Disney in the last few years too, right? And just like big banks, they're too big to fail, right? And I know that's going to sound like a conspiracy theory in the sense that, is the US government backing all major US investment banks? Well, clearly they are, because they're considered too big to fail, and they get bailouts from the US government, right? Is Google and Disney too big to fail? I would argue that they push certain agendas that serve the interest of the US deep state, however you want to label them, corporate agenda, the Hollywood agenda, things like that. So that's why you have these inefficient processes. On the surface, as one small cog in a machine, one small employee, it might not make sense to you. But in the grand scheme of things, when you start looking at the big picture, like why are they operating in an inefficient way? Why aren't they focused on innovation? It's probably because there's some type of narrative piece of the puzzle that I'm missing there, which would explain why they would hire DEI hires over competent hires, or focus less on innovation and more on surveillance, things like that.
About launching things. So you end up either working on a project that gets canceled, like if you're working on Stadia or Glass, or there are dozens of projects that, people work on and get to launch and they're like, nope. Or you're just, you make proposal after proposal and everybody says no. And that leads to, so that's the second issue, is the ability to launch and be innovative at Google. It doesn't exist. It's working on the search algorithm a bit. And, you make millions of dollars by doing that for the company, but it's not the most interesting work.
So this is quite important for anyone who's going into a corporate role, Google or any other ones, right? Things can be quite demotivating because you can work very hard on a project or something, and then it fails, or they stop it, or they put it on hold for a year, and then or other people get to take the credit of the work you're doing. I remember doing a lot of detailed analysis around risk management for sales and trading division around commodities and trading real commodities, physical commodities, or trading the derivative of these commodities. And then all of a sudden, a female team member who I hadn't even met, who was off on sick leave for long time periods, who was out on maternity leave for a long time period, she kind of came back and they wanted her to kind of do that role. But I'd already written the report and it was about to go to senior management, and they just got her to look over it, made some small edits, like making it a bit shorter, and then her name got put on the top of it, like she was someone who wrote the entire report. But this is what I mean about, unfortunately, when you're a big corporations, your ability of the work you do, of the credit you get, of the pay and bonus and how that's justified, so much of it is out of your control, right? And it becomes kind of demotivating. That's why, if you're working for a major tech company and you find that and you feel that way, or a major finance company, consider about building up some more years of experience, then consider a smaller company, maybe a startup, where you will have a bit more exposure and ownership of all the work you do. Now, these big companies, they're stuck on small improvements to impress management and not big game changer decisions, right? And that's why people say, you're a cog in the machine when you're doing a job. You just got to keep your manager happy, or the phrase, I pretend to work and my manager pretends to pay me. It just shows you how pointless a lot of this kind of environment is. And that's why Google, which we think wouldn't be like that based on its kind of positive reputation of being a good workplace environment, is an interesting case study here. So let's see a bit more about the consensus culture of Google.
Google is a consensus culture. And that means that everybody has to say not no for something to happen. And that means anybody can come and say no, and there's no consensus, and then it gets stopped. So people this, and they can show influence and power by saying no to whatever it is. And I have dozens of examples of this. But when you have a consensus culture, nobody can say yes. Nobody can stand and say, we're going to do this, and we're just going to go through with this, and May. Nope. Everybody has to agree that this is a good idea. Everybody has to agree that this is the right thing. So to get anything done, and really anything, in sales or engineering or whatever, you have to go around and get everybody to not say no. You have to make sure everybody does not say no. Otherwise, you're sunk. And that's a tiring process. It's frustrating because you're people of this and that, and they oftentimes people have no idea about what you're really doing and the details and so on. And you give a presentation, and their value that they can add is to say no, or to ask some questions that send you off into a month's work of nonsense. And I've seen this multiple times. That's frustrating.
So that's quite interesting here about consensus culture. You think at Google, at some of these big major banks to major tech companies, they would want people to speak up and really push for innovation. Now, Google, after they had a massive scandal actually where an employee was talking about how this diversity and equality thing was not working out and creating inefficient workplace environments and effectively leading to censorship and things like that. There was a famous open letter that was written by a Google employee called James Damore. You can look that up. And Google all of a sudden started really clamping down on employees' freedom of discussing different topics, really focusing on innovation, and became a consensus culture, which is no different from major investment banks. There's a new process approval. I've worked at some companies where we have a new business initiative, and they have a new process approval process where you'd have the consultation of the business who comes up with the idea typically, then operations, finance, audit, risk, compliance, management divisions who'd all discuss how can we move forward and make money with this new business initiative. And it becomes dragged down in so much bureaucracy and people saying, no, we can't do this. No, we have this long, cumbersome process we have to introduce for it. It becomes so ridiculous just to innovate in the business, right? And I think this is what I mean when companies have these, they're not operating in a lean way. They're not really focused on growing and changing. And you see this kind of stagnation, this stiflingness across Western civilization right now, right? Not just in Google or major investment banks. There's no real push to innovate. It's about maintaining the current power structure, the current matrix, if you want to call it that, the current system of control, rather than really pushing things forward. Because if you push things forward and even have some innovative business ideas, it's going to somehow undermine the current power structure. So that's really the backstory between a lot of these corporate mind games you'd see here. And what ends up happening is, particularly if you're at the more junior level, this is something to look out for. You might end up doing a lot of work, and then someone quite senior than you, who you don't typically know, they've been having discussions on that particular project, business initiative, whatever it is, and then you've done a ton of work, and then all of a sudden they just decide to cut it short and throw the project in the trash can, right? And throw away that particular opportunity. That's why I recommend what you should do if you're more junior, middle level of management or junior, is work things at a slow pace, understand the pace of the company and work at that pace, because there's no point rushing ahead and doing a whole bunch of analysis and report writing and things like that, only for it to be cancelled or someone else to take the credit. Really understand what's going on as much as you can, because there's no point doing a whole bunch of extra work and all of a sudden things are cancelled without you being involved in that discussion in any way, shape or form. And what's interesting about a lot of these consensus cultures is many people of different divisions, as he says, they just want to exercise their power. So you have a lot of people who think, oh, they're senior, they're qualified, they know what they're talking about. There's lots of guessing and pointless questions in these group committee meetings. Lots of people bluffing about what they know and what they don't know about certain topics, just to push for extra research, just to delay processes, just to flex their power, just to get a bit more leverage or maybe more credit for a particular project. That's the reality of the corporate world, and that's Google kind of ended up becoming, rather than becoming a creative place to work at and to innovate and really change the world and make a lot of money.
Woo! It's very political, right? Not the most political that I've seen in any organization, as I mentioned, but that's a big one. I don't like politics. I like performance. I like when people are super smart and they know what they're doing and they're all looking to the company and push it forward and be innovative and take risks and so on. Google's not the place. If you like, Google is not the place for you. It's 20 years ago it used to be. Today it's not.
Great point there. Now, you said there about, what you think Google would be, innovative, entrepreneurial and things like that. It's really not about that. It's about office politics and playing the office politics the same way as any other major corporation rather than performance. So just be aware of that. And that's the purpose of this video, really help you understand how Google's inner working actually is, right? Same in banking, same in many other top type of corporate roles.
It is very, very, it's not left-leaning. It's not, kind of left of center. It is very, very, say almost militaristically liberal. So there are, there's this whole idea that you can bring your whole self to Google, and they made a big stink about it. And I'm fully supportive of that. And I think everybody should bring their whole self to work. I think that's wonderful. But not if you have any sort of conservative views. It's all about, really what they mean is the LGBTQ plus community can bring their whole self to work. I'm fine with that. There's nothing wrong with that. But if anybody comes in and has ideas that are more conservative, they get creamed. And there's a famous essay that I think James Damore wrote sometime in like 2016, 2014 or so, and about how if we want female engineers coming into Google and there are not enough that are going to schools and qualified, then we have to lower the standards to bring them in. The logic is sound, but he got fired like that. Now, rather than having the debate, which at Google I can understand, you don't want to have that debate. It is a policy, and you follow it or you don't. But at that time, Google had the reputation that everybody can have discussions internally. So we had meme boards where you make memes about what's going on and so on. There was discussion boards about all kinds of topics, and people could really, for the beginning, really discuss things that were controversial, and that was the culture there. At the James Damore incident, that essay that he wrote, the culture was shifting in a huge way from being this discussion that you really could discuss all kinds of issues, because that's how we get to the truth. And even if there are issues that are uncomfortable, you could discuss them on the boards. At that moment, it shifted. At that moment, everybody knew. There was a shudder of like, whoa, you cannot discuss these things anymore. And there used to be an open environment at TGIF where you could go and talk to Larry and
So essentially what he's explaining here, they managed to restrict freedom of speech effectively at the company. And you should understand, we do live in a two-tier society, regardless of what people tell you. As I mentioned in some of my videos, there's a requirement for men to be labeled as toxic masculinity and to get the whole girl power narrative. Men have to pander to women. Straight people have to pander to the rainbow flag community. People who are right-wing have to pander to the left-wing. It's a two-tier society. If you're conservative, masculine, if depending on the race, depending on the propaganda of that year, if you're white, there might be discrimination against you. And this is what happens, right? When you have these, like I say, lowering of standards, men fired for saying that DEI doesn't work too well. This censorship, authoritarian culture is just so embedded within major corporations now. I mean, people can't even pretend that there is a bias like that. If you are in the UK, for example, and you're critical of migration, you think there's too many, hundreds of thousands of millions of people coming across the border without, being vetted correctly. If you criticize mass migration in the US too, you get labeled as far right. There's all these type of terminologies for you. So it really is like, there's no real solution there, right? If you're a man in corporate environments, you're going to have to deal with intense censorship and authoritarian culture. Now, this really raises the question, what is the future long term, right? Because you think, if you want to work at one company, it'd probably be Google or something like Google, where you have that flexibility. You can be a bit more free in terms of how you work there. That's what we always hear about these tech companies. You can dress smart casual. You can wear clothes like I'm wearing now. You can maybe chit chat about different ideas. It's not super just working through rigid processes every day. But that's not what happens over the long term when it comes to major corporations. So my advice kind of to everyone out there, if you're a man particularly, is really think carefully about how to navigate through the corporate environment. And this is something I can help you with through my career advice. There's a link in description. And then over time, building skills. You can operate your own business on a freelance basis, collaborating with others. And I think that the long-term future is you have these major corporations that have a lot of power, of course, as I say, backed by the deep state or whichever other shadow government entity there are. And they have their power structure. They operate a monopoly or an oligopoly, and they collaborate essentially run a cartel in each industry. You see it with grocery stores, you see it with major investment banks, you see it with tech industry. There's the top FANG tech companies. They basically operate like a cartel, and anytime there's a new innovative company that coming up, they sell to Google and they make millions or significant amount of money, and these people typically retire, those smart people who are outside the system. Now I think so on one hand you're going to have these major big dinosaurs that cling on to their power, and on the other hand you're going to have people who maybe develop skills and they decide to be independent, maybe as a freelancer, maybe they're a freelance accountant and they have their few clients and they build up their own kind of following. And you're going to have people who develop specific skills because they want to drop out of corporate. So for example, imagine you have 5 men who drop out of corporate jobs. You have one man who is a highly skilled accountant, another one who's good at law, someone who's good at sales and marketing, and then maybe they have some contacts abroad in the Philippines, in India, in various other locations, Poland, places like that, and they hire them as virtual assistants. And maybe they're all running their own thing, their own legal practice, their own accounting practice, but then they decide to combine together on a business idea, people all over the globe, maybe say 5 to 10 people who work together in some way or form, and they run their own hyper efficient business. It could be a marketing agency. I'm sure many people of you have seen over the last few years of one of those business ideas, not just drop shipping, but other things like social media management agencies, things like that. These are really highly skilled people who are great at working, whatever that work is, but the corporate environment is really stifling to them and they find alternative solutions. So that's why now, especially when there's not much left to lose, you should think about how your career is going, what your savings and investment base is. Do you want to be a minimalist who can focus on pursuing their passion and living life on their own terms? So that's the type of things to consider, finding your own dream job and leveraging maybe your significant resume, working at major corporations and having those big names there, and how you can leverage maybe working at Google and Amazon to doing your own thing. I know it's easier said than done, but it's worthwhile thinking about that opportunity because it is your life and you really want to take control of it rather than be a cog in a corporate machine. So that's great. I hope you found that helpful. Let me know what your opinion is, your honest opinion is on Google in the comment section. I know we technically are on YouTube, which means that we are on Google's platform. So let's see what you honestly think about them in the comment section. Thanks for listening. 2 recommended videos on your screen right now, and I'll see you next time.